Good evening. Hope you all had a nice weekend and a fantastic start to the week. Today the market had an extremely up and down day of trading. Markets started in the green due to vaccine news, but ultimately ended the volatile session in the red due to large amounts of selling in the final hour. The Nasdaq performed the worst, as it lost 2.13%. The S&P 500 lost 0.94%, and the Dow eked out a gain of 0.04%. Over the weekend, a multitude of events happened, none bigger than China announcing sanctions on U.S. officials, including two senators, which happen to be Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Marco Rubio. These sanctions come as retaliation against the United States for their sanctions against senior Chinese officials due to Beijing's treatment of Uighur Muslims. Notably, China placed sanctions on the Congressional-Executive Commission on China, which monitors human rights and the changes made in the rule of law in China. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said, quote, "The U.S. actions seriously interfere in China's internal affairs, seriously violate the basic norms of international relations, and seriously damage China and U.S. relations." End quote. She then added, quote, "China will make further responses based on how the situation develops." End quote. The western Chinese region of Xinjiang has already freezed U.S. assets, U.S. travel, and has prohibited Americans from doing business with them. The U.S. has now asked citizens to be cautious while in China due to increased risk of being detained. The U.S. advisory said, quote, "Exercise increased caution in the People's Republic of China due to arbitrary enforcement of local laws for purposes other than maintaining law and order. This arbitrary enforcement may include detention and the use of exit bans. U.S. citizens may be detained without access to U.S. consular services or information about their alleged crime." End quote. The advisory also said that U.S. citizens may be, quote, "subjected to prolonged interrogations and extended detention for reasons related to state security." End quote. They also warned that they could be detained and or deported for, quote, "for sending private electronic messages critical of the PRC government." End quote. The Global Times, which is a Chinese-backed publication, accused the U.S. of hyping up fears of China and a, quote, "blatant distortion on how Chinese authorities enforce the country's laws." Clearly, the relationship between the two superpowers are nearing decade lows, and it seems all but certain that there will be more retaliation to follow. Lastly, over the weekend, coronavirus cases expectedly surged, but the state of Florida had a record-shattering day, as they reported an increase of 15,299 cases in one day. Florida now has a total of 269,811 cases, bringing its total higher than countries with populations that are larger, such as Spain, Italy, and France. Florida still has a high positivity rate of 11.25%, and currently the state's hospital beds are nearing capacity. Admiral Brett Grier, who leads the Trump administration's testing efforts, said, quote, "We do expect deaths to go up. If you have more cases, more hospitalizations, we do expect to see that over the next 2 or 3 weeks before this turns around. We're not out of this at all. We're all very concerned." End quote. The U.S. has reported more than 60,000 new cases daily for 3 days in a row now. Markets rose this morning as the FDA gave both German biotech firm BioNTech and U.S. pharmaceutical giant Pfizer a fast-track designation for their jointly developed experimental coronavirus vaccine. The fast-track status by the FDA is granted to speed up the review of new drugs and vaccines that show the potential to address unmet medical needs. The company said that they expect to begin a large trial with up to 30,000 participants as soon as later this month, if they are to receive regulatory approval. So far, the vaccine has shown potential against the virus and was found to be well tolerated in early-stage human trials. This morning, we also received news of a potential merger between semiconductor producer Analog Devices and their rival Maxim Integrated Products. This would be the largest merger of the year for the U.S. and would be a $21 billion deal to be all paid in stock. This is a move by Analog Devices to expand market share in the automotive and 5G chip-making space. The offer values Maxim at $78.43 per share, which is a premium of about 22% compared to its close on Friday. The company said in a statement that the deal added Maxim's strength in automotive and data center markets to ADI's across broad industrial, communications, and digital healthcare segments. The deal is expected to add to adjusted earnings of the combined entity in about 18 months following the close, with $275 million in cost savings by the end of year 2. Home builders had strong sales numbers in the month of June, as there was an incredible opportunity for the industry to perform well. Low supply of existing homes, increased preference for new and high-tech homes, and the flee for suburbs made for a high level of demand. Even though the official numbers are not out yet, according to a survey, sales have jumped 55%. Comments made by Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Shiller were backed up by the trends that home builders are seeing. Shiller said that urban housing prices could be in for a decline as employees continue to work from home and decide to leave the city life. Shiller noted that the benefits of urban living, such as access to restaurants, museums, events, etc., have begun to be questioned by consumers. Shiller did note that there won't be an exodus from cities, and urban house prices won't fall like a rock. He said, quote, "Some people thought then that this was going to be the end of cities, but it didn't happen because people still like to be together," end quote. So far, urban prices have not yet been affected by the pandemic. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance Program, which is a federal measure that offers grants of up to $10,000 to entrepreneurs, has ended after reaching the $20 billion funding limit allowed by Congress. Its purpose was to help small businesses with allowing them to get access to cash fast. Other sources of funding are beginning to drop as well, such as the Paycheck Protection Program. This is worrisome as coronavirus cases surge and many businesses are faced with the reality of shutting down for a second time. The federal government had its biggest monthly deficit in history during the month of June, as spending on programs to combat the coronavirus recession exploded, while millions of job losses cut into tax revenues. The Treasury Department reported that the deficit hit $864 billion. The previous deficit record was in April, where it was a loss of $738 billion. Currently, the U.S. is on pace to meet and exceed the $3.7 trillion deficit that has been forecast by the Congressional Budget Office. The total would surpass the previous annual record of $1.4 trillion set in 2009. Today, more than a third of U.S. states reported record high new daily average coronavirus cases. Though COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. have declined or remained relatively stable for weeks, even though cases have more than doubled since May. This number could see an increase as patients get deeper into their battle with COVID-19, as hospitals have been running out of space. In fact, deaths actually appear to be on the rise again, as the 7-day average is beginning to move upwards. Last week, the WHO said that it shouldn't be, quote, a surprise if the global death toll begins to climb. They said, quote, "Some of this may be lag. We may see deaths start to climb again because we've really only experienced this rapid increase in cases over the last 5 to 6 weeks," end quote. In response to this, California announced that they will be closing indoor operations for numerous businesses, which will include restaurants, bars, movie theaters, and museums. In addition to this, California's 2 biggest school districts announced that they will be having online schooling when classes resume in the fall. In fact, the WHO came out and said that they hope the decision of reopening schools doesn't turn, quote, into yet another political football in this game, end quote. They cited that children can still get sick, and some children have already died to the virus. On top of this, the long-term effects of the virus are still unknown. The state of New York placed strict guidelines on schools if they want to reopen. Governor Cuomo said that the state is not, quote, going to use our children as guinea pigs. We're not going to use our children as a litmus test, and we're not going to put our children in a place where their health is endangered. It's that simple, end quote. The rough day in the market is evident in this graph. Only 3 sectors were in the green, but none by all that much. Tech was clearly the big loser, falling more than 2.4%. Consumer services weren't all that far behind. The selling of overbought tech names was apparent, as growth as a whole was decimated. All of the sizes of core stocks fell as well, but large and mid-cap value stocks were able to come out in the green. The best day in the S&P 500 was had by Wynn Resorts, as shares gained a nice 9.62%. This move comes as China is reportedly going to lift quarantine requirements for travelers coming from Macau. Wynn Resorts happens to own a resort there and are a clear benefactor due to this news. Next up is Mohawk Industries, which is an American flooring manufacturer. Shares gained 8.7% as it seems that investors believe this stock has been oversold. Recently, shares of Mohawk have been tanking after it was announced that Deutsche Bank believes that Mohawk committed fraud due to reported fictitious sales numbers. The worst day was had by Fortinet, which is a cybersecurity company. Shares fell a large 10.07% as they were a victim to the sell-off in growth and tech stocks. Shares of Dexcom fell 8.05% today. Dexcom develops and manufactures glucose monitoring systems for diabetes management. Shares fell as investors took profits, as Dexcom fell victim to the sell-off in growth and tech stocks. Over the past year, shares of Dexcom are up an astounding 191%. Today, we only have one notable company reporting earnings, which happens to be PepsiCo, ticker symbol PEP, which is the well-known food, snack, and beverage corporation. This morning's earnings were positive, as Pepsi beat on both EPS and revenue estimates. Pepsi beat on non-GAAP EPS estimates by 7 cents, as they ended the quarter with a gain of $1.32 per share. Revenue was down a slight 3%, but still finished at $15.95 billion for the quarter, beating estimates by $480 million. The company also announced that it believes that it has ample liquidity and flexibility to meet business needs and return cash to shareholders. Investors clearly were pleased with the earnings report and the way Pepsi was able to handle the worst of the pandemic. Thus, shares were up around 3 to 4% for most of the day. Ultimately, Pepsi fell victim to the sell-off and ended up by only 0.33%. That is all that I have for tonight. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.